Hey everyone, wotBEE buzzing in, and today we're gonna talk about the major change that's going to take place, and that is the rebalancing update. And we're gonna talk about the buffs and nerfs of all the tech trees, including the European one. So sit back, straighten up your back, cause we're gonna discuss all the buffs and nerfs. Starting off, we're gonna start with the 3 Japanese vehicles. Now, the first one is STB1. STB1 currently, as it is in its current form, is a dominating medium at tier 10. Why? Because firstly, it is the only medium with 11 degrees of gun depression, topped off with amazing turret armor, and is actually one of the most deadliest vehicles to face at tier 10, especially if it's a hilly map. So in the next update, as you can see, STB1 will be getting a nerf. And why is that? Firstly, the DPM will decrease because of the reload timing that is increasing. Secondly, the shell speed is decreasing by a heavy margin, and that's gonna just ruin the accuracy for STB1 by big means, if not by big means, by at least some means. Bruh. Thirdly, we're gonna talk about the power to weight ratio. So this tank is going to lose a lot of acceleration, but it's also getting a max speed buff, which means it will be able to go faster, but at the cost of its accuracy. Second up is the Type 71. Currently, Type 71 is a decent heavy, if not the best heavy. And in the next update is going to be rebalanced. We can't say it's a nerf, we can't say it's a buff, but as you can see, I probably think it is a buff. Why? Because listen, its reload time is definitely increasing, but the alpha gold shells, their alpha is gradually increasing. Like, that's a lot of increase. And not only that, Type 71 is getting an increase in its penetration capabilities, so we can say it's a buff. Third tank, the WoTBEE. Currently, let's review how it is currently. Currently, it's an amazing vehicle. It has the best pen at tier 10, if not the best, the second best, I suppose. And let's talk about if it is getting a buff or a nerf. So the WoTBEE is getting a buff. Firstly, it's getting an increase in the shell velocity, in the shell speed. Secondly, it's getting an increase in DPM because the reload time is now decreasing by about 0.48 seconds, and that's not really low, that's actually quite decent. But it is losing a bit of rotation speed, which is not much, it's slight, it's not gonna affect the tank much. And the scatter factor of the turret is also getting a slight increase, probably, which is not even noticeable, but we can say the WoTBEE is getting a buff. Secondly, the second tech tree, let's talk about the German vehicles. First up is the mouse. Now the mouse is currently the best heavy at tier 10 for me, if it's not a hilly map, because the mouse already performs just so well, and in the next update it's still getting a buff. As you can see, it's gonna have a slight increase in DPM, shorter reload time, and the scatter factor of the gun when the turret is being rotated is slightly increasing. Second up is Really 15, my boy, the guy that got nerfed heavily so many times, but now it's getting a slight buff. Rotation speed is increasing a lot, reload time is decreasing, meaning more DPM, power to weight ratio is increasing, and the max speed is decreasing. It is a buff. Thirdly, we have the Kampfpanzer 50T. Okay, is it getting a nerf or a buff? It's just gonna be balanced. Why? It's losing slightly is losing its penetration by a slight, but it's also losing aiming time, which means it's gonna aim faster and you're gonna be able to hit more shells. So we can say it is a rebalance. Fourth, we have the VK 90.01. Now currently this tank is really good, it performs really well. It also has combat stabilization, and I don't think any other German heavy has that ability. And so is it getting a buff or a nerf? Well, it's getting balanced. Firstly, it's gonna have shorter aim time, which is good, but it's losing rotation speed of the turret. And it's not much, but it is going to be a bit noticeable. Apart from that, it's getting an increase in the turret rotation, which is pretty mid. It's good. Now, the fifth tank is the VK 70.01. Now this tank currently is really enjoyable, it's really good, and is it getting a buff or a nerf? It's getting a heavy nerf. Why? Firstly, you're losing your penetration. Secondly, reload time is getting slower. And lastly, less scatter factor. So yeah, it's a big nerf. Now let's go. In this list we have the Leopard 1. Currently performing, Leopard 1 is the best medium for me. Why? Because of its amazing gun. Leopard 1 is the most accurate medium currently in the game. And not only that, Leopard 1 has an amazing DPM. It's flawless. And it's really fast. I think it's even faster than some light vehicles. So, is it getting a buff or a nerf? The answer is maybe. We can call it a slight nerf or a rebalance, but here's the info. Leopard 1 is getting a higher time to reload its shell. It's losing its health by 50, and power to weight ratio is also decreasing. The rotation speed is decreasing, and the gun turn limit is also decreasing. But the tank is getting max speed in reverse by 2 kilometers an hour. And not only that, it's getting gear all provisions, which means you can cover up all the losses it has for its speed. And not only that, the biggest thing about Leo 1 is that it's gonna get adaptive concealment mechanic. It's an amazing mechanic, and this covers up for all the nerfs it just got, because this ability is just amazing. So we can say it's a rebalance. The next tank, E100. Currently E100 is a mid tank. It's not really good, it's not really bad, but it is a fun tank, and if you know how to angle your tank properly, it's really good. But in the next update, it's getting a nerf. Firstly, the biggest nerf for me over here, I think, is that it's losing its alpha by 20. And for the 128mm, it's getting a buff. The reload speed is gonna be faster. For penetration, it's getting a higher pen for the 128mm, but decrease for the 152mm. Aim time is gonna get a better aim time for 128mm. We don't know about the 152 one, maybe it's gonna remain the same. As for power to weight ratio, it's getting an increase, and hull rotation speed is getting a decrease. So it might be a rebalance, but I'm gonna put it in the slightly nerf category. The next one is E50M. E50M is an amazing vehicle, and in the next update it's gonna get absolutely broken. Why? Because already the tank has OP armor. The tank is just impenetrable, especially for the lower tiers, and even the third armor is so hard to pen even for the strongest tank destroyers. And in the next update it's getting shorter reload, and which means higher DPM. But the nerf it has getting is that the shell speed is decreasing, and the shell velocity is decreasing for the tank. But E50M is getting reactive armor consumable, which means it's gonna be able to have more hits. And lastly, the armor. They're just overdoing it. they're really overdoing it because the armor is gonna be flawless. So it's a major buff. It's gonna get broken. E50M is getting a big buff. The next tank is Jaguar Defensa E100. So, buff or a nerf? Yes, it is a mid rebalance, or I'd say a slight nerf. Firstly, losing health by 150 points. Secondly, aim time is getting an increase. Reload time is getting an increase. But the armor on the side cheeks of the turret is getting buffed. Slightly, not much, but yeah, it's gonna save you a lot of hit points for that 150 you just saw there. Next up, we have the American tech tree, starting off with the M48 pattern. Pattern is getting reactive armor buff, gear oil buff, reload time is getting a slight increase, but for the things it's getting, I'd say it's a buff. Second up, T25 pilot. Yeah, it's getting a nice buff, horsepower increase. I mean, my bad, it's it's health points. The T25 pilot is getting more HP, more health, and that is an increase of 90. Power to weight ratio is increasing, reload time is decreasing, which means more DPM. So yeah, it's a big buff. Third up, M60. M60 is getting the improved engine power boost, which is good. Sandbag provisions for extra health, that's good. Reload time is getting a nerf. You're gonna have to take longer to reload by 0.19 seconds. Speed shell is decreasing. I'd say it's a slight nerf for the things because you need speed shell velocity and not much speed boost. So yeah, it's a slight nerf. The next one, P110E4. Now what is the E4 getting? Is it a nerf? Is it a buff? Let's find out. Power to weight ratio decreased, rotation speed decreased, view range decreased, aim time decreased, which is good. Sandbag provision for extra health, I'd say it's a nerf. Not worth it for some extra health. Next up, the T57 heavy, performing really good currently, and rotation speed is getting a buff. It's gonna take shorter for it to rotate. Aim time, that's a nerf, getting longer to rotate. Max speed is getting a buff. Reverse speed is getting a buff. T57 heavy will be more better. And next up, the Sheridan, by far the most interesting rebalance here for me. Why? Firstly, it's getting an increase in penetration. Secondly, more speed. It's already really speedy. Oh, it's getting more speed. Next up, even better, more alpha. That's amazing. Scatter factor, more. Power to weight ratio decrease, not much of a change, but yeah, Sheridan is getting a really nice buff, especially that the Batjet is now getting a view range nerf. Sheridan is gonna be the top tier in light vehicles. Next up, Concept 1B. Currently, it's really overpowered, I think, because of its small size and the amazing third armor. But what is it getting? Is it a buff? Is it a nerf? Well, it's a buff again. Why? Because it's getting a shorter reload time, and the scatter factor is getting a nerf, but yeah, doesn't matter much. But yeah, it's getting a buff. Next one, XM66F. It's a decent tank, it has good DPM. Is it getting a buff or is it a nerf? Let's find out. Aim time, slight nerf, like barely noticeable, it's nothing much. Change type of shells, AP, APCR, not much. Reload time is getting a slight buff. You're gonna have more DPM. It's nice, but we're gonna say it's a slight buff. Next here is T110E3. E3, buff or a nerf? Let's find out. Rotation speed decreased. View range speed increased. Aim time increased, which is bad. Reload time decreased, which is good. Penetration of gold shell, that is also increasing by 5 millimeters. Not much, but it's good, and it's already a really good performing tank. It has super speed, which makes it like really usable at really a lot of times. So yeah, we can say it's rebalance. So next up, M6Y. It's the tier 1. tier 10, yo. Not the tier 1. It's the tier 10, yo. So the tier 10, yo, aim time increased on both of the guns. Nerf. Power to weight ratio increased. Max speed increased. Armor decreased. I'd say it's a nerf. Currently it's performing well. It's a good tank. Next up we have T95E6. Probably my most favorite tier 10 heavies. Why? Because of its speed. It's performing really good. Currently it performs really well. Is it getting a buff or a nerf? Power to weight ratio decrease. And that was really its main, speed was its main power, but oh well, it isn't much. Rotation speed is getting an increase, and armor on the cupola is getting higher by 28mm, which is gonna help this tank. So next up we have the British tech tree. The British tech tree. Okay, the first one, FV215B 183. The most famous, most popular boy is 183, the tank destroyer. Currently, how is it? It's performing well. It's a good tank. You either do 5000 damage or you do 0 damage. So is it getting a buff or a nerf? It's getting a big heavy nerf. Speed shell velocity decreased, aim time increased, which is bad. Shot dispersion slight decrease, which is good, but yeah, it's not noticeable. So yeah, it's a big nerf. Second up, FV217, the Badger. It's an amazing tank currently. It performs amazing. Okay, is it getting a buff or a nerf? It's getting a rebalance. Why? Speed forward is getting an increase. Terrain crossing capacity is also getting an increase, but the rotation speed of the hull is getting a big decrease. We couldn't easily circle this tank, but now we can, because it's gonna have a slower hull rotation speed, and that's a good rebalance. It was needed, but the boy didn't lose all his strength, because it got faster at some point, and not only that, it got a few range nerfs. So yeah, it's a rebalance. Next one, we have the FV4005. Aim time increased, which is bad. View range decreased. Scatter factor decreased. It's just a nerf, straight up a nerf. There's nothing good about it, and I think it needed a buff, because yeah, it's OP, but once you're exposed, you're so big, you got a big head on yourself. Yeah, you die really quickly. Next up, FV215B, the British tech tree heavy. View range increased, health increased, aim time increased, which is bad. It's a rebalance or a slight buff. Currently it performs well because it has high HE capabilities, so it's good. Next up we have the Chinese vehicles, and good news, the BZ75 isn't getting any buff or a nerf. It's a good tank. I think it needed no buff or a nerf. But yeah, let's start off with the 121B. 121B is getting a big buff. It's already amazing, good DPM, amazing aim, amazing accuracy, like everything on it is just flawless, especially that it has adaptive concealment. Yeah, the gun depression is a big issue, but oh well. The buff is it's getting more HP, more power to weight ratio, and higher armor by 10 and 12mm. So yeah, it's a really good buff. Second up is the 114 SP2, the Chinese tier 10 collector. Is it getting a buff? Yes, only in the armor. On the turret sides, you have 10 more millimeters of armor, and on the front of the turret, you have 10 more millimeters of armor as well. So hopefully it's gonna do much better hull down now. And there's another Chinese vehicle at tier 8, the Type 59 collector vehicle. It's getting a nice buff, and I guess it needed a buff. And what's the buff? HP increased by 70. Reload time decreased. Adaptive concealment on this boy as well. That's amazing. And not only that, armor buffs as well. So this tank is gonna do really good at tier 8 as well. First up is the tank destroyer WZ113 GFT. Engine power, nerf. Reload time, nerf. Rotation speed, nerf. Alpha damage, buff. Reactive armor consumable, removed. Currently, this was the most overpowered tank destroyer, and by far I think it was most played in this update because everyone knew it was just amazing. Even the players in tournaments were just spamming this tank because it was just performing so well. So yeah, this nerf was highly needed, and that's just it for the fishy tank. The next one, WZ-132-1. Is it getting a buff or nerf? It's actually getting a rebalance. Let's see. Penetration decreased, scatter factor increased, view range increased, which is amazing because this light tank has adaptive concealment topped off with concealment of light tank mechanic, and the reload time is getting decreased, which means, and it's a huge decrease, it's gonna get a lot of DPM. It already has flawless DPM, it's gonna get more DPM. Max speed in reverse, that's getting higher, and topped off with gear all provisions means it's gonna go even higher in backwards, and it's gonna be a fast, good spotting vehicle. The WZ-132-1, I'd say it isn't a rebalance, it's actually a buff. Next up, WZ-1115A. Buff or a nerf? It's a buff. More HP, less shot dispersion, power to weight ratio is getting a decrease slightly, rotation of the hull is getting an increase. So yeah, it's a buff. Next up, WZ-121 performs really good at tier 10. It has tungsten, it has adrenaline with flawless aim, although it has bad dispersion, but flawless aiming time, good DPM, good armor, bad depression. It performs really well at tier 10. Reload time is getting increased, which is a nerf. Rotation speed decreased. Power to weight ratio increased. Reactive armor consumable, I'd say it's a slight nerf or a rebalance. Next up, the Chinese heavy WZ-113 heavy tank. Power to weight ratio decreased. Max health increased. I'd say it's a buff. It's a buff. It's definitely a buff. It's really nice. It performs really well at this moment. I think it's the second, third, or it's either the second or the third highest DPM tier 10 heavy. So next up, we're going to the French buckets. First up, my boy BC25-2 losing a lot of things. It's a massive nerf for this. I think it's the end of this tank's meta. Nobody's gonna play it anymore. It was a must, at least one in a team of tournaments, because the spotting range was just so amazing. This tank isn't just only getting a nerf, but a buff at some point too. But it's just gonna make this tank more aggressive, and not the playstyle isn't gonna be the same anymore. Firstly, lesser armor on the front. View range decreased by 20 meters. That's a lot, making it an average. I think Sheridan does better than this now. So yeah, BC not a spotter anymore, are ya? But yeah, reload time between shells is getting decreased, which is good. It's gonna dump out the shells faster. Aim time is getting better, and the main shell is gonna be APCR, and the reload time is also getting an increase. So currently it was an amazing tank, but now I think it's gonna be more of an aggressive tank, and I don't think it's gonna be as good. I'd say it's a big buff. My bad, it's a big nerf. Okay, next up, Foch 155, the tier 10. It's getting another buff. It's getting another buff at the cost of its acceleration though. Alpha damage increased a lot. Alpha damage on the 155mm increased by 20. Reverse speed increased. Terrain crossing of capacity increased. Reload time increased, which is bad. Rotation speed increased. It's gonna rotate faster. Power to weight ratio decreased heavily. It's getting a lot of loss in its acceleration. View range decreased by 10mm. Armor, massive buff in armor. More on the turret, more on the cupola, and more on and less on the lower plate. My bad. So it's a big buff. It's a big buff for the Foch. Next, French vehicles. We have the AMX 30B spall liner provision. Good. Not gonna get more etchy on it, eh? The second one is vertical calibration. Not needed. but can be useful at some points. Power to weight ratio, getting a nerf. Reload time, getting a nerf. I'd say it's a nerf overall. It performs okay at this moment, but I would prefer the leopard one, and it's amazing. Literally, leopard one is amazing. Next up, AMX 50B. Aim time increased, not good. Penetration is getting an increase in the etchy, but no effect for the other standards of the show. So it's a slight nerf, nothing much, nothing special. Next up, we have the FCM 50D. Simply getting a big, it's getting a big buff. Reload time decreased, sandbag provision for health increased, improved engine power boost consumable. It's gonna, I think people are gonna use it for ramming now. But yeah, it's a big buff, more DPM too. Next up, the AMX M449, the Firebird one. Getting a buff or a nerf, it's a big buff. Reload time decreased, that is really good. Reactive armor consumable, it already has so much health, and it's gonna just basically give it a bit more health. It's like in like one way. And armor, more armor on the front hull. So this tank is just getting a buff again, and it's already a really fast and strong heavy. So yes, getting a big buff. Next up, we have the Russian vehicles. Starting off with the Object 907, the medium with tracer shells, a really good tank, good ability. Is it getting a buff or a nerf? It's a buff. 20.9 power to ratio is increased to 22.2. View range is 265. For reference, that's just as much as BC now. Reload time is getting a slight increase. Rotation speed is getting a slight decrease. It's a rebalance, but overall I'd say it's getting better, or a rebalance. Next up, T100LT. If not the best, it's gonna be the second best light of this update because it's getting another big buff. Reload time is decreased heavily. It already has good DPM, it's gonna get more DPM. Penetration increased. Power to weight ratio increased. Shot dispersion slightly increased, not good, but yeah, it's an overall big buff. Third up, we have the T62A. I think it's getting a nerf. Why? Reload time increased. Speed shell heavily decreased. It's getting really bad speed shell, and but it's getting improved engine power boost consumable, which is good for it or not really practical, so I'd say it's a big nerf. Next up, we have the Object 777, performing really good right now. And this Russian thing, I don't know what's saying, but it's probably aiming time. So its aiming time is getting a nerf. Reload time getting a buff. Terrain capacity getting a buff. It's overall getting a buff. IS-7, it used to be an amazing tank, noob friendly, and just recently it's been performing really well, but it's over for him now because it's getting a nerf. Losing penetration, top speed decrease, reverse speed decrease, reload time decrease, armor, lower plate is getting a decrease, which is really bad for this tank. And the first one here is Object 268, really good tank destroyer. Shot dispersion is getting a decrease, penetration nerf, rotation speed nerf, it's an overall nerf, and sad for it, it's a nerf. Object 140, it's just like nobody plays it anymore because there's just so much better options in this. But yeah, it's getting a buff in the next update. Better pen, better alpha, higher alpha, less shot dispersion, a slight 0.1 higher aim time, not really noticeable. Reload time is getting an increase. Yeah, it's a rebalance, nothing much. ST1, losing penetration, straight up nerf. Next tank, IS-8, losing penetration, straight up nerf. They both share the same gun. I think they're losing that penetration there. Object 260, really not much. Nobody plays it, to be honest. People prefer IS-7, but still, shot dispersion is getting a nerf. Third rotation speed, a nerf. Reload time slightly better with combat stabilization mechanic. I don't know what why Wargaming gives combat stabilization mechanic to the tanks that are already fast. It's just useless on this tank. It's stupid to give it to this tank. But yeah, that's just a nerf for me. Next up, the Object 268 is getting an increase in its penetration, which is good for it. It's a buff. It's already an OP tank, so it's getting more buff. Next up, in the Russian vehicles, we have Object 263. Rotation speed 42. Next up, we have the Object 263. Rotation speed nerf, speed shell nerf, horizontal aiming angles buff, change of shell type, and aiming time is getting a decrease. I'd say it's a nerf because its mobility and rotation was the core strength of the tank, and when you used to wiggle a lot with this tank, you used to bounce shells a lot. Next up, we have T22 medium. It's getting a huge buff. Reload time decrease, meaning it's gonna have more DPM, power to weight ratio increase, it's already fast. Not only that, it's getting tungsten, which is amazing. That means more overall DPM. Shot dispersion, slight increase, doesn't matter. Speed shell velocity decreased, it's bad. Scatter, doesn't care. Armor, slight buff on the front, it's already really troll. On the side, on the back, it's getting 10 more mils. On the sides, getting 7 more mils. At the bottom, it's decreasing armor, but overall, that's just a good buff. IS-4 is getting a buff as well. Reload time decreased, more DPM. Health increased, speed increased, power to weight ratio increased, armor also increased. It's a big buff for the IS-4. That's really amazing. On to the last tech tree, it's the European nations. So, what about these vehicles? Firstly, we're going to talk about the Minotauro. Minotauro is just ruined now. Minotauro is done, it's ruined, it's finished. The lower plate is getting a huge nerf. That armor is no longer impenetrable. So yeah, you can easily pen the lower plate now, and reload time also is getting a slight buff. Alpha is getting a huge nerf. 20, not huge, but yeah, it's pretty noticeable. Shell reload boost consumable on a tank with reserve shell is just stupid. The tier 8 one getting a nerf on its armor. Reload time nerf. Damage by module is a bit down, but yeah, it's a nerf. We have the Caro 45T, currently an amazing vehicle, but it's gonna get a nerf. Reload time nerf, as you can see. Penetration of gold shells will decrease. Gun turn up is getting a decrease. Health is getting an increase. Gunpowder provision, good. It's gonna be able to hit more, which is good. Gear all provision as well. I'd say it's a rebalance instead of a nerf. The VZ55 is getting a new gun, and we're not really gonna talk about it until it comes out and we see how those guns perform. TVP T5051, alpha damage increase, reload time decrease, it's a rebalance. Emil 2, penetration decrease, speed shell increase, it's nice, it's a buff. And the next one on the European tech tree, the last few tanks. Firstly, we have the Kranwagen. It's getting a rebalance, penetration decrease, reload time increase, bad. Reload time between shells decrease, good. Alpha increase, good. Scatter factor increase, good. So it's a rebalance. 60 TP is getting a nerf, slower rotation speed, reverse speed is slower, power to weight ratio is better by little margins, which is basically nothing much. Penetration of gold shells, that's a buff, it's a rebalance. Next up, the Progetto 65. Max speed decrease, gun turn limit decrease, reload time increase, health is increased as well. Shot dispersion decreased, combat stabilization mechanic, again it's a fast vehicle, but yeah, it might help at some points. CS63, a tank that needed a huge buff because everyone called it pathetic, is now getting a buff. less reload time, which means your tank is gonna be having more TPM. Power to weight ratio is better, shot dispersion, max speed is like getting an increase as well, rotation speed is getting a decrease, adaptive concealment mechanic, I didn't know that. That's a really nice thing for this tank. It's good. Rhinoceronte, currently my most favorite tier 10 heavy. It's amazing. It's still getting a buff. It's getting more health, but slightly less shot dispersion, doesn't really matter. STRVK, slight nerf. Power to weight ratio is getting a decrease. Aim time is getting an increase, which isn't good. Rotation speed of the hull increased. Penetration increased. Probably a rebalance, not a nerf actually. And I guess that's really it. These are all the tanks that are getting rebalanced in the next update. Let me know what you think about these tanks. Let me know what you think about this rebalancing, and if you liked the video, comment down below, and if you made it this far, comment cookie so I know if you made it this far. Also, some tanks are getting a PBR, just an extra fact for you. It's the VK72, Conway M60, the Chinese tank destroyer WZ1113 GFT, and the FV215B. So that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. WoTBEE buzzing out.